Hi out there in Facebook land. It's Thursday. That means it's time for second cup. And I have to admit, today's second cup is water because it's been so hot and humid. I can't do the hot coffee right now. So until I master the art of the iced coffee, um, I just can't get it right. I'm going to have to go with water for second cup. So I hope everybody is doing well. And I just wanted to talk a little bit. I have a special guest today, and I think I have pools on the brain because pools are gonna come up in our talk again, just like they did last week. But I have a special guest, and it's going to be really interesting. It's going to sound really boring, but it's going to be really interesting. So stand by. I am going to get my special guest, Bryan, and see. Hi, Bryan. Bryan can hear me, but it's not working. We see you.
Hmm.
I
I'm
hear
not
you
sure if you
now.
can hear me. I'm just having a hard time with the audio.
I hear you.
Let's see.
I'll keep talking because I can hear you. So until you hear me. No, I don't hear you. I don't know what's going on. That's really strange. No, I don't hear you. Ah, technology. I don't have you muted or anything. That's all right. It gives us more time for more people to join. I can't hear you. You want to jump back out and jump back in? I don't know. Can't hear you. You there? I still can't hear you. Well, let me take it out and then click back in again. And we're gonna hang in there, everybody, because I really want to have Bryan on. This is gonna be fun. Believe it or not. I'm gonna make it fun. Technology is good, huh? So let's get Bryan in here again. Thanks for hanging in there, everybody. So anyway, like I was saying, what I want to do is, if you have comments about topics that you want, um, I definitely want to hear from you. So put some comments below um, about things that you want to talk about. And Bryan,
Hey,
ah,
good audio?
it works!
All right, there we go.
Yay! Are you at the office?
I am at the office.
You're
Yeah,
so professional. I'm not.
I try. I think it's maybe every other day I come in, and it's good, having to get up off of the couch and out of the house. Like the back in the real life thing. It's nice to not work from home.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I mean, I always liked working from home, but I think like especially with this, like I have to get up and put makeup on and do my
yeah, yeah,
it like
it's
forces your brain to wake up.
yeah, it's like our daily routine of what it was for forever, really, and now going to just
Yeah,
okay, maybe a couple times a week. It's like, wow, this is really difficult. It's like, nah. Yeah.
it's not bad. It's all
Yeah.
right. So thank you so much for doing this
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I know you're super busy. You're one of the busiest departments in our whole company. So
Yeah.
introduce yourself
Yeah.
and what your function is.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, my name is Bryan Bolick. I work for Barristers Land Abstract. We are the closing company that Howard Hanna owns. We do all the transactions for the Howard Hanna agents that elect to use us for their sales. So we handle all the closing paperwork. We do all the title work to ensure that when a buyer's purchasing a property, they're getting that property and it's actually theirs. Someone else doesn't own it. I mean, it sounds so easy, but it's way more involved than that. And yeah, the general function sounds very simple, but yeah, there's a lot to it. There's so many different little, even with surveys specifically.
Yeah.
Funny, like how many things that pop up and you're like, I've never seen this before. Like I'm sure you
Yeah.
same thing for you in your role where things just happen in a transaction. You're like, I've never seen this before, and we learn so much so frequently that it's like you can never make this up. Every hypothetical in the world you couldn't get here. So
All the time. All the time. So when I was going through this past week and I was really busy and things kept popping up that went back to the survey. And so I was like, this is a really good topic because I think a lot of people don't know what one is,
Yep.
or don't know why they need one,
Sure.
except in certain situations. So I even have a little visual aid. I have a little picture of a
Look at
survey.
you. You're
Look
so much
at
more
me.
than me. You ready for me? This
Yeah.
is me. I'm like,
Ah!
here we go. I'm
Well,
like,
that's okay. Let's use,
there you are.
if you know what's on yours, do you want to use yours instead?
No, that's okay. I can set it up. It's probably much easier. So yeah.
Yeah. So probably one of the most popular questions, and when you guys get started in your process, is you ask the buyer, do you want a survey?
Right.
So start with that. What is a survey and what would I need it for?
Sure. So a survey, so on every transaction, regardless of whether there's financing involved or whether it's a cash transaction, we ask the buyer at the very beginning of the process, hey, do you want a survey? And it's not something that they're required to have. It's something that we always recommend. We'll say, hey, it's not required, but we strongly recommend it. And I think most realtors are going to be like in the same boat. They're going to be like, hey, we would recommend it just because it's, there's a lot of stuff that can come up on a survey that if you don't have, you don't know. And it opens up like a whole can of worms and you're going to have issues down the road. So if you get that survey done in the beginning of the process, even before you purchase the property, you know what you're getting into. You know where things are, if there's an issue or not. And so the surveys, the surveyors, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they are licensed, so they have to, follow a bunch of guidelines that they have. And when they go out to do the surveys, they're basing so a lot of the questions that we get is, okay, well, what's the cost associated with a survey? And so that really depends on the size of the property. So if it's a half acre or less, which most of the properties in and around the city, they're going to be under that.
Mm-hmm.
Half acre or less, I mean, you're looking at, there's two different kinds of surveys. That's the other thing. So there's two different kinds of surveys and each has their own cost. So if it's a half acre or less, and this is specifically with us, we do have a relationship with a surveyor. So these prices they're considerably lower than if you would shop just privately finding a surveyor. They're going to probably quote you a little bit more, but a half acre or less without stakes is $250. And then if you want the property to have stakes set, that would be $450. And what the stakes are, so on your little survey that we have up here, the four corners that are circled. So there's two in the front and then there's two in the back. If you get stakes, they actually place like a metal spike, and they put like a little neon ribbon, attach it to that spike, and then they put them at the front and at the back corners of the property. So those are the options that we give the buyer for the survey, specifically with us. I mean, there's some other options for surveys that are out there, especially when you get into more rural areas with large, there's a lot of acres involved. They can get really crazy expensive.
Sure.
There's a lot more to do. You're looking at where things are, and when you're talking maybe say 10 acres, it's a lot different than doing just a small little tiny lot, say in like Southside or Lawrenceville.
Right. And so even if you are gonna get a small little place in Southside or Lawrenceville,
Yeah.
a survey's still a good idea, right? I mean,
Yeah.
even for the simplest, maybe you want to see about putting if there's a little yard you want to put a fence up or something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things I always kind of laugh about, and I'm sure you've seen this before, so many of the properties in the city. So with these surveys, so these are, basically the front line that you can see here right above at the bottom of your survey where it says Castlegate Avenue, right above there, that front line. And then there's one right behind it. That's showing where the building line is. So you can see where it's labeled building line. So many of the properties in the city are over the building line. And the reason for that is because the properties were erected and built prior to the plans being set forth. So it's, it's not like, oh, we have to move the house now. A lot of people, have purchased and they see their survey, just for example, say it's Southside, they buy a house in Southside and, smaller and kind of like, and they're like, oh my gosh, my house is over the building line. Do we have to like pick up the house and move it? No, you don't have to. Because probably every single person on your street is in the same boat. They're all
Right.
basically in the same row there. But yeah, it's just one of those things where depending on when the property was erected and when the building plans were set forth, you're going to have that. So that's not really going to be an issue. The primary things that like the survey is going to be looking for that's going to protect the buyer is if there's any encroachments on the property, meaning so say there's a neighbor who has a fence that's over that's going out of their property into your property, or say it's a shed that they built, they randomly built, they didn't take, they didn't follow the advice or the, really the statutes that their like local, borough or township has saying, hey, you need to have a survey when you build the shed. So whenever the neighbor builds a shed, it's on their yard and not half on your yard. So whenever you get your survey, it's going to show. So it's going to show you.
Let's look at yours. I'll hide mine.
So when you look at the survey, it's like we're doing it backwards. When you look at the survey, so it's going to show you here. It's going to show you your house. So this is the actual. Trying to do it backwards again, failing. That's showing the house. Okay, so it's showing the house in relationship to all these neighboring parcels. Okay, so it's going to show you the house, but it's also going to show you here any of the items that are around it. So say this. This should be labeled, but I think this is just it's like a little small covered porch right here. And then this is, I believe, the like a walkway or a driveway situation. Fail.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically it's showing you where it's basically showing the relationship of where your property is compared to all the neighboring properties and parcels, so that if the neighbor does have a fence or a shed that's over, you can see that. Or if, say, you're some of the detached garages a lot of these houses have, they might be over a little bit, or even a wall. People tend to build walls and they think, oh, I've lived here for 30 years. I know where my property lines are. I don't need a survey to tell me where I can build my wall. Then they build the wall, they erect the wall, and the next thing you know, they get a new neighbor, and that neighbor gets a survey, and then they have to have a conversation of, hey, your wall's on my side of the property. And that's where you get into some of the other items that get a little bit more involved, but are still, you can work around these things. So in the example of that, you move into your house and there's a wall that is over onto your property. So at that point, what we would do, so this is one of the reasons why getting the survey when you purchase your property is so valuable, because you have someone that's able to walk you through this process. So you're not kind of doing it alone. You don't have to reach out to find someone to go through this with you. We're able to do this. And so what happens is we would look at the survey and confirm if there is any kind of encroachments that are on the property. And at that point, if we confirm, yeah, this is an issue, someone's walls on the property, at that point, we'll draw up a document called an easement. And an easement, what that's going to do is, so that's just outlining, and this agreement is signed by both parties. So it's going to be signed by the proposed owner or the buyer, and then also the neighbor. And the neighbor is signing off. So if it's the neighbor's wall that's on your property, the neighbor is saying, in the event that my wall falls over, I'm going to pull it. If the wall falls over, if I rebuild the wall, or if something happens to my property, if I'm the buyer, because of his wall being on my property, that they're responsible for it. If they do at some point, say they built the wall years and years ago and it's starting to just deteriorate, and they're going to rebuild the wall. that easement agreement is going to say, hey, when you rebuild your wall, you got to bring it back onto your property. It's basically an agreement that whoever's real property is onto the neighboring property is responsible in the event of any damage. But it also says, hey, if I have to redo this at some point or I need to rebuild, I'm going to take care of that for you.
That's great. So you guys take care of all those hard conversations up front because that's always the question. When you're looking at a house and everybody's really excited about it, and whose wall is that, and what happens if it falls over? You guys have that hard conversation so that people don't have to start off confrontational with their brand new neighbor.
Right. Yeah. It always is. It's always an interesting time. The number of times I've showed up at a neighbor's house and knocked on the door and got to explain an easement, to them. Especially with some of the folks who are like, I know that's on my property. You're like, I'm not questioning that, but this document right here, it says a different story. So you have to have that because what will end up happening. So if there are some certain encroachments will, flag a mortgage company to say, hey, we want to make sure that, an easement's in place, or they'll require it, and that's the one other thing too. I don't know if I've touched on. So for surveys, it's never a requirement for us as a title company. There are certain times it is rare though that mortgage lenders for financing would require a survey, but it's pretty rare, but I have seen it in the past.
But it's just still always a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When you think of what the cost is, even if say you got a stake survey and it was $450, $450 is a pretty good deal if you have an issue, and if you don't have an issue, then you have a peace of mind. And that's really what it comes down to, is just to make sure that what's yours is yours and what's your neighbor's is your neighbor's.
Right. Well, and so how about another example, speaking of easements, and this is when it kept coming up. For me, I have clients that are building a house and there's a public easement going through the property. And, their initial thought was, oh my God, what does that mean? Does that mean like they're going to be on our property all the time? So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, there's so many properties. I can even speak to myself personally, like my wife and I, our house, there are multiple utility easements on the property. And basically all that's saying is, so say it's like whether it's a water line or whatever, a gas line, like a main gas line or something, whatever utility is there. It's not saying we're going to be there all the time. We're not going to show up every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and be drilling. What that's saying is then in the event that there's an issue, so say it's like a main waterway or something, I don't know. If there's an issue, they have the ability to go in and fix it. And it's also saying basically you're not allowed to build on top of it. So like you're not going to build a detached garage and plop it right down on top of a utility easement, or else you're going to have a problem.
Right. Or a pool, in-ground pool.
Or a pool. Yeah, exactly. Or a pool. So again, that's another thing. The survey will show the utility easements. It'll show whatever line is running, in the backyard. It's usually the backyard. And it'll usually say what it is. So yeah, it's one of those things where I think a lot of people freak out about it. I know when I bought our house, I was like, wow, what the heck is this? Like, this is crazy. And 6 years later, I'm like, oh, I see this every day. Most properties have something to some degree. Yeah. Most properties have something. Like the one I grabbed here is in Beaver County, and they probably have septic, and who knows what they got. But yeah, there's not anything on that. Of course, the example has nothing on it. It's great.
Of course. Well, like you said, I think even if you spend $450 for a stake survey, to know ahead of time before you go and build a pavilion in your backyard, and then find out that for some reason the utility company needs to bust it up.
Yeah, and two, with I know for where I live, like say you want to build a shed, any kind of structure you're erecting, so sheds or a pavilion or whatever. They were like, so I live in Bethel Park. Bethel Park requires it by, their municipal code. So you have to have a survey and plan that you have to show like the building inspector, because there's different requirements they have. So it's another thing where a lot of people get surveys. Just, I had someone recently purchase property there and like I want a survey. I'm like, okay, no problem. And they're like, no, I really want the survey. I'm like, we'll get you the survey. It's going to be good. They're like, we needed to build a fence around the backyard for our dogs. And we're like, that's great. So there's other purposes there too. So, it's one of those things where if you think you might build a shed or a deck or a swimming pool or a fence or something, that you're going to need it, the best time to get it is really when you purchase the property. So that way, one, you know what kind of space you have to build those items, and two, if there's anything that's on your property.
Right.
Yeah.
So it in general, if there is something encroaching on your property line, the takeaway is it's not the end of the world.
No.
And you can work through it, and it's fine, and it's better protection to just do it up front.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of those things where I think most buyers, when they're going through the process of purchasing a home, especially first-time home buyers, it's just a lot to take in. There's so many things you're doing, and you're writing a lot of different checks, and you're using a million papers, and people are coming at you from all directions. You're just like, what's going on? And then you're like, yeah, I'll take a survey, and you get a survey, and you're like, there's a fence over, and you're like, what am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
And it's not that, and that's the thing, when you have, a good agent by your side, and you have a closing company that's able to work with you and walk you through the process and just say, hey, pull you back in. It's like, no, you're fine. It's going to be okay. And there's a resolution for just about everything, whether the neighbors like it or not. That's the other part of the story that can be a little bit tricky. But most times when you're moving into a property, I would say generally most people are very receptive to, just being a good neighbor. That's really what it comes to.
Yeah, just iron it all out ahead of time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's a resolve for almost every situation. It's just a matter of people kind of working through it together and, being reasonable.
Yeah, sure. Great. Well, I know you have closings to get back to. So just out of curiosity, what are you averaging now, like closings per week? Is it getting crazy?
So it's been very interesting. Recently, we have actually seen quite a few new contracts come through. So right now, it's kind of slowed down a little bit, but really hasn't that much. I mean, we're probably, I don't know. I don't want to quote numbers because I don't really know the numbers, like hard numbers.
Right.
It's down from this time last year. But the thing that's really exciting and promising for just the market in Pittsburgh is that over the past week or two, since basically everyone was able to start working again, there's been a spike in work coming through. So there's a lot of contracts. Like June is shaping up to be an incredibly busy month, which is awesome. And I know for our region here in the South, specifically in the South Hills, we're not very far behind where we were this time last year. So when you think of how long everyone was shut down, from the boroughs and townships to you guys as agents not being able to show houses, everyone being shut down, essentially, it's really it's crazy how strong the market is, that it's not far behind last year. And the pandemic last year. So
that's right. That's awesome.
Yeah,
well, thanks again, Bryan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a great conversation, and I'm glad to jump on with you.
Shameless plug. I'm going to use you to plug my show for next week because I'm going to talk to your beautiful wife, Brenna.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Bryan's wife, Brenna, is a stylist extraordinaire and design consultant, and I'm going to talk to her next week. So I'm going to use Bryan to tease that. But so looking forward to that. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, it's great. Great chatting. Right. I hope you have a great day.
All right, you too. Thanks, Bryan. We'll see ya. All right, bye. Okay, so that was, I hope that was informational for you. Really, helpful stuff there. And again, so next week is going to be a really fun topic. I'm going to talk to Bryan's wife about closet organizing and life organizing and home organizing. And that's going to be a really fun topic, something really light. And Brenna's fantastic. So that'll be next week. And then please, in the comments, if you have any ideas, anything that you want to talk about, any questions that you have, put it in the comments or message me, and I'll be happy to search down a guest. I'm going to take Second Cup on the road a couple of times, and see what trouble I can get into. So it'll be fun. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.